So it's another huge weekend in the Premier League, and I think the biggest game, probably the biggest story, is Aston Villa, for the first time in over 100 years, winning 10 successive games in all competitions, beating Man United 2-1. It felt like the Morgan Rogers story. And Rob, I know you wrote about the game afterwards. We'll get to the Man United element first, but how good was Villa? How good was Morgan Rogers?
Well, I mean, the biggest compliment you can pay Villa is that they weren't particularly good, but yet they still won a big game. They had Morgan Rogers, who came up with the two best moments of quality in the entire game, and it was enough to win 2-1. And if you're looking for signs that Villa could possibly last the course in this title race, obviously they're not going to be favourites in that behind Arsenal and Man City. But if you're looking for signs, the fact that they can win these quite big games without actually reaching their full potential is a massive positive for Unai Emery. I'm sure that he'll analyse the game and think that they could have done an awful lot better. But ultimately, at this stage of a season, particularly when you get into these kind of difficult days in December, the most important thing is to win. And at the moment, they've got probably the most informed player, or one of the most informed players in the Premier League in Morgan Rogers, and he has got the quality to win games. That says everything about this Villa team. I think they deserve a massive pat on the back for the way they've gone about it in the last sort of 10 games. You mentioned there about the record. First time they've won 10 plus games since 1914 consecutively, but they've also recovered from what was a pretty disastrous start to the season. They could barely score a goal when the Premier League season started, let alone win a game. And to recover from that to the position that they're in now is fantastic.
James, everyone's, focusing on the top two. It's an Arsenal-Man City title race, a two-horse race. And maybe it will be, but next Tuesday, December 30th, Arsenal play Villa at the Emirates. I mean, how big a game is that? Because, Villa have got a decent record at the Emirates in recent years as well. So are Arsenal focusing on City, or are they really should be focusing on Villa now?
Well, they won't take Villa lightly. I mean, that was a game that they've lost, I think it was it last season they lost it, and it was effectively the only game they lost in the run-in. Emery's got a little bit of a hold over Arteta and Arsenal at the moment. And look, I mean, Arsenal lost at Villa Park. I was at that game, last kick of the game, incredible. I mean, unbelievable noise when Emi Buendia scored in stoppage time. Just an incredible moment. And if Villa go to the Emirates and win, then there's not a lot that that I think that knocks any kind of idea that they're up there by chance or by accident, to one side, because they, as Rob said, they obviously won a big game against United at the weekend. They beat Arsenal and they finished that game stronger. And I know a lot of people sort of talk about squad depth with Villa, and that if they get a few injuries, that they won't be able to last the pace. And I think that's probably right, but I do think that also kind of underplays just the balance that they've got at the moment with, when Ollie Watkins starts and Donyell Malen comes on to finish the game. Buendia is another one who kind of comes on and plays that sort of 15, 20, 25 minute cameo role at the end. Just, they've got a really, really nice blend and balance at the moment. Jadon Sancho, another one I know, obviously he's had a sort of checkered last 2 or 3 years, but someone who can really make an impact in that kind of late stage of the game. They've got a lot of firepower, Villa, and it's just a great balance to their team at the moment. And they probably do need to go to the Emirates and win for people to take them seriously, but they didn't win a league game until the 28th of September. It's a remarkable thing. And I think that the fact that the league is probably not quite as strong as it has been in previous years, combined with Villa being, so well balanced at the moment, has maybe just closed that gap at the top a little bit between thinking, can they last the pace, to, okay, they're going to fall away a little bit and finish top four, which would still be a great season for them.
I think one thing that strikes me about Villa as well, we're in this modern era where fans are desperate for players to arrive at their club. They want new signings all the time, and they want what's January going to bring, who they're going to sign. And it's never based about a club playing the long term. Now, obviously, Villa have got a situation right now with PSR. They're right at the limit, so they can't really spend in January. But you think of what they brought in the summer: Jadon Sancho and Victor Lindelof, two basic Man United cast-offs. Harvey Elliott on loan from Liverpool, who's literally not kicked a ball. He's played minutes, and he won't play again in the Emirates, made it clear. So they lost Marcus Rashford and Marco Asensio in the summer because they didn't translate deals for them into loan deals. So despite all that, despite the fact that they lost two of their better players in the second half of last season, and the fact that they brought in three players that haven't really contributed, Unai Emery's still got this team, on the brink of a title charge, which is amazing. It shows the value of a great man, not a great manager, a very, very good manager. So when fans are desperate for players to come in January, just look at what Emery's done at Villa and think, actually, sometimes a bit of patience, a bit of sticking with a manager that knows what he's doing is the way to go forward. And I suppose that's a nice little way to pivot Rob into Man United, because we're at that situation again. January's coming, who can we sign, etc., etc. I mean, obviously United need players because long term they have to improve, but did we see signs at Villa Park on Sunday that actually, for the first time United lost a game, it didn't feel like a crisis?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it was a difficult game to analyse from United's point of view, because I actually think that they played quite well for most of it. You have to also put it into the context of what Ruben Amorim is having to deal with at the moment. He's lost Brian Mbeumo, Amad Diallo and Mazraoui to AFCON. Obviously, Casemiro, one of his key midfielders, was suspended. He loses Bruno Fernandes at half-time. Kobbie Mainoo probably would have started the game but was injured in training the day before. He's losing players left, right and centre. He ends up the final whistle with two 18-year-olds in Jack Fletcher and Shea Lacey on the pitch. He's got Lisandro Martinez, a defender in the centre of midfield, who actually I thought did quite well. But these are the problems that Ruben Amorim is dealing with at the moment. And actually, still, when you consider all that, I thought that United did quite well, but ultimately they've lost the game. And the difficulty that Amorim has got is that I think isolated, that game isn't really a big deal because the performance was okay against a team that are flying in the league. But when you set it against the points that they've dropped at home recently against Everton, West Ham and Bournemouth, it's not really that great. And the worry now for Amorim is that he is still in a position where he's under pressure and he needs results, but he's going to have to do it without some really key players in the next few weeks. Christmas is difficult anyway with the schedule, but you've got Newcastle on Boxing Day, you've got Wolves at home in between Christmas and New Year, you've got a really tough away game at Leeds first weekend in January. Having to face those without those three AFCON players, and in particular, possibly Bruno Fernandes, which is a massive miss, depending on what you think. I mean, United fans will argue all day about Bruno Fernandes, his quality, and whether you think he's a world-class midfielder or not. The one thing you can't argue about is the way that he leads that team and his commitment to the cause. And if you take that away from United, they miss something. So these are worrying times for Ruben Amorim, just because of the problems he's dealing with, and he hasn't got the luxury of going another long run without a couple of wins, because he is still under pressure that his overall record is not good enough, and he would point to that himself. He needs results, and he's going to have to do it with a really slimmed down squad now.
Just actually on the injuries, Rob, because De Ligt and Maguire have been big misses recently. Do we know when they're expected back? Because obviously they've got a very inexperienced, certainly Heaven and Yoro at the back is inexperienced. So is there any sign of the horizon that De Ligt, Maguire or both will be back soon?
No, and that is a major worry. I left those two out of the list of players I said were missing before, but they are two major misses, because it's meant that you've got Lenny Yoro and Aidan Heaven having to play in a back three, and they're both kids. Lenny Yoro at Villa Park had one of his poorer games, but ultimately he's 20 years old playing in his second season in the Premier League. It's not easy. The De Ligt one is a worry, because when that happened, Ruben Amorim said initially that it's not a big deal. He might miss the odd game. He was close to coming back straight away, but he didn't make it. And it's just one of those that has kind of dragged. And we keep asking Ruben and saying, is he going to be back? And he says no. And actually, at Villa Park yesterday, Amorim was asked about Fernandes, and he said, well, actually, I don't really want to comment about Fernandes because I made a mistake with De Ligt. I told you all that he was going to be back quite quickly, and there's still no sign of him coming back. And he didn't want to do that with Fernandes. Now, if he's saying that about De Ligt, that tells me that this could be a longer term problem than perhaps they were expecting. Obviously, they will hope to get either De Ligt or Maguire back very quickly, hopefully for that Newcastle game, possibly early in the new year. But the way that Amorim has talked about De Ligt in the last couple of weeks suggests that they are quite worried about that. And they need him back. Again, United fans will argue all day about De Ligt and his quality, but he is a senior player in that dressing room, a leader who's played at big clubs in the past. And if they're going to miss Fernandes, they need someone like De Ligt at the back to kind of marshal all that.
I just want to pull you up on Fernandes a bit, because I know you said, I think you put it on Twitter or X overnight, that United won't be able to cope without Bruno Fernandes. But I think the positive aspect from the game at Villa was that, they should have got a draw. I mean, if Matheus Cunha puts the header away, they get a draw. But the one area where they actually are covered is the number 10 role, because Mason Mount has had a really good run recently. If he stays fit, he can play in that role. You've got Cunha who can also play in that role. And even, a worst case scenario, Joshua Zirkzee can play as a number 10. So they're okay for creative players. And I think we saw Lisandro Martinez come into midfield, who I thought was really impressive in a kind of a surprise in that kind of way he played. That if Amorim decides to play him alongside Casemiro, then all of a sudden you've got a kind of a front five that actually functions. It's just the back where they've got so many injuries that I think is the issue. And I think that for me is where the pinch point is for United. It's not creativity because they're scoring lots of goals now, it's at the back.
Yeah, and possibly, I mean, the injury to Fernandes possibly opens the door for Kobbie Mainoo. I mean, I said before, I thought that Mainoo probably would have started at Villa Park had he not had that calf injury in training. United are telling everyone that it's a small issue and that he was quite close to making the squad, but just didn't get quite there. So Amrim has said all along that the reason Mainoo is not playing is because he plays in the same position as Fernandes. So if Fernandes is out for a month, you would expect that if Mainoo is fit, he will play. Now, that is the chance that Kobbie Mainoo has been waiting for. We've all seen the noise around, the lack of game time, the T-shirt with his half brother, and all that kind of nonsense that has gone with it. But really, this could possibly be a chance for Kobbie Mainoo to prove that he can A, play in that system, and B, thrive in that kind of Bruno Fernandes role. I think what you lose with Fernandes is that kind of commitment, the ground he covers, the kind of the leadership that he gives on the field. Again, I do think there's a debate that Man United fans will have about his quality. And if he is missing and Kobbie Mainoo comes in, Ruben Amorim has said in the past that when he first came in, he didn't really fancy Casemiro, and Casemiro wasn't playing. Casemiro came in, did really well, and now he can't get him out of the team. Kobbie Mainoo needs to focus on that situation and think that can be me. And possibly, he probably right now is thinking that he might leave Old Trafford in January. But if he can come in and play a string of games, impress Amorim, and Amorim goes, actually, you were right all along, you should have been playing, then maybe Kobbie Mainoo's future is at Man United. This is his chance to take it and prove everyone that he should have been playing all along.
Rob, we're talking a bit about Ruben Amorim scrambling for answers. Obviously, the January window is just around the corner. How active do you expect United to be? And is Antoine Semenyo the answer?
Well, I don't think he's the answer. But I thought that Ruben Amorim on Friday gave a really interesting answer when he was asked about January, because he said, pointedly, we might do something, but it might not be the thing that you all expect us to do. And what we expect United to do is to sign a central midfielder. That is at the top of their list. The issue, though, that they've got is that the likes of Elliot Anderson, Adam Wharton aren't going to be available in January. So that has to be pushed back to the summer. So if you're not going to buy those in January and you have got money to spend, they're treating Semenyo as what they would call a market opportunity, in that he's got a release clause for 65 million, I think valid for the first 10 days. He is the type of player that they think would boost the squad long term. He's not what they need right now, but they don't feel that they can pass up the opportunity to pass on a player who has got proven Premier League quality and is right in their age bracket at 25 years old. So it's possible that they go all out to sign Semenyo in January against the likes of Man City, Liverpool and Tottenham, that he's added to a group of attackers that is quite well stocked anyway, with when Mbeumo when he comes back, Cunha, Sesko, Fernandes when he comes back, they've got Xerxes still, you've got Ahmad who can play as a 10, so all these players kind of battling for the same position. But United will look at it, or are saying that they're looking at it as a long-term prospect, and they're hoping that possibly they could add Semenyo in January and then move to the summer and sign the likes of Anderson or Wharton, and then you've got a far more well-rounded squad than you had at the start of this season. Again, though, lots of United fans will go, I appreciate that Semenyo's got fantastic quality. He's having probably his best season in the Premier League, but why are you spending £65 million on him when you could be investing in a central midfielder, which you are in desperate need of? The January window is tough, and that there are all these kind of conversations that go with it.
Well, obviously United's defeat meant that they took a bit of a hit in the terms of their pursuit of top 4, top 5. Probably top 5 will do for Champions League this season, but Liverpool won at Tottenham to claim 5th spot. Now, that was a weird game, James. I know you were at the game with Beth at the weekend, and Liverpool won the game against 9 men at the end, and they could have actually dropped points there. So we'll get onto the Alexander Isak situation really, but when you come away from that game, are you thinking that Liverpool are back in the title race, or Spurs are destined to sack a manager? What's the kind of what was your sense walking away from that game? What the situation was?
I think that Liverpool should be more concerned about the last 10 or 15 minutes than the previous sort of 75. I mean, the way that they were hanging on with 2 extra players on the pitch in stoppage time was that should set alarm bells off for this team, because that is where and I know they are obviously the current champions, but that is where serious title winning teams keep the ball, shut the game down. and Liverpool just were completely scrambled. And it was really the first time that Tottenham had put Liverpool under any kind of sustained pressure in the game. And I think it was the reason why I think it was such a strange game was because of the way that Thomas Frank set Tottenham up, really. Because normally when there's a red card half an hour into a match, that triggers a substitution because it has to reshuffle the team. And Thomas Frank didn't make a change. And the reason was, I think, was that he was already kind of set up effectively to play without the ball. Not obviously to play with a man less, but effectively to sort of say, well, look, we're going to be as compact and as tight as we can be in our own defensive shape. And then we're going to try and hit you on the break, which is effectively what most teams do when they go down to 10 men anyway. And when they went down to 9, it was almost as if, well, okay, the shackles are off here. We sort of have to go for it. And under that, in those circumstances, under that pressure for the first time, Liverpool wilted. I mean, they were absolutely on the ropes in that game in a way that they really shouldn't have been, and they should have seen it off. And I think that fragility will be the main reason why most Liverpool fans are not thinking, we're back and here we are suddenly going to go and win 10 in a row and maybe even get ourselves back into the title picture. I still think that's a team that needs a lot of work on the training ground, and they obviously need to get players back fit. They were missing quite a few. Again, Szoboszlai is now going to be suspended. I know we're going to talk about Isak in a minute. Cody Gakpo's out. They've got a few that they're missing that would strengthen that starting lineup. But it was the absence of that maturity to just close a game like that out, which is 11 against 9, is fairly straightforward. Is keep the ball. And they just kept giving it away and making wrong decisions and really just giving Spurs the opportunity to rally in a way that actually would have helped Thomas Frank, because I've been at Spurs home games where they've been quite negative towards the manager, and they weren't. They stayed with the team, and that, I think, was fueled by a sense of injustice they felt around the red cards, but also the fact that they rallied so well right at the end.
Mark, where do you sit on Liverpool? I know in our game that we love to talk about momentum and turning points and all that kind of thing. I think it's 6 unbeaten now for Arne Slot's team. Do you see that they've turned a corner, or is this just going to be a season where it's a couple of good results, a couple of setbacks, and then back again?
I've got a funny feeling about Liverpool. I think they are the one team that could actually mount a surge in the second half of the season, although the Isak situation isn't going to help them. And James is right, they've got a couple of injuries. But I was watching the Newcastle-Chelsea game on Saturday lunchtime, and Newcastle were 2-0 ahead at the time. And I'm thinking, Chelsea dropping back. And I looked at the betting odds to win the Premier League, and Liverpool were 33-1. And I thought, they're only 10 points behind Arsenal. And this is a strange season in the sense that...
Is this where the Ogden millions are going? 33-1.
Yeah, exactly. Just you watch. I held back, obviously. But it's a weird season. I think, Liverpool have got they've got some great firepower, but again, it's the caveat is Isak's situation. The Salah situation, so we don't know how that's going to play out. I mean, Salah may not come back. He may move on. Obviously, if Isak's out for a while with this suspected broken leg, then it changes everything. So there's a lot of big questions about Liverpool in the air, but I do think that even though they've got problems at the back, they still have that ability to beat teams. That we asked before about why Man United look at Antoine Semenyo, because teams want players who can score goals. And Liverpool have got goals in that team all over the place. So that's why I think that they could. I think they'll qualify for the Champions League. I think they'll have no issue qualifying, finishing in the top 4. I know it sounds strange at the moment, but Liverpool are for me, definitely going to finish top 4. But they have issues to address. And I think they need to know the situation of Isak, how long he's going to be out, and does that impact on the Salah situation? So that's a massive scenario for Arne Slot to deal with, or the club to deal with. They may have decided on Salah last week. They may have thought, well, Salah's heads away and there's a chance of getting rid of him in January to Saudi Arabia. But if Isak's out for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, they can't let Salah go. So a lot depends on that. But ultimately, I don't think you can rule Liverpool out of a top 4 finish. And I think still, because I saw Arsenal Everton at the weekend, not very impressive at all. City, I've been impressive recently, but it all depends on Erling Haaland. I don't think Villa will stay the course. So I still think Liverpool, as crazy as it sounds, have an outside chance of winning the league, but it's a very outside chance, but they'll finish top 4. But, let's wait and see. The millions aren't going on the 32-1 just yet. But, I mean, listen, it was a strange game. I said this before, but from a Tottenham perspective, James, actually, before we go on to Tottenham, let's talk about Isak, because that is the big situation right now. It sounds like he's got a suspected broken leg. I watched that at the time, and as soon as he scored the goal, the reaction on his face was that he'd done a bad injury. How Mickey van der Ven got away with that even being, course. That was such a bad tackle. I mean, he wrapped his legs around Isak's ankle at the end. That's a red card for me. He should have been sent off. He should have done 8 men.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of those where it just got lost in the goal, didn't it? It just sort of lost in the moment. Anywhere else on the pitch, I think he goes for that. And I think it's probably why Spurs can't. I know 2 wrongs don't make a right, but I think it's why Spurs can't really have any complaints about the officiating. I thought the only decision that they probably were justified in arguing was the Ekitike second goal. I think that is a foul on Christian Romero. But yeah, I mean, look, on Isak, you have to feel for him. I mean, it felt like such a big moment for Liverpool. Florian Wirtz's first assist in the Premier League, combining with Isak to score, great finish. You sort of think, okay, this is the first real glimpse of the 2 mega money signings combining, and this, and obviously with Al Salah on the pitch, you start to think, well, is this maybe this is the future of Liverpool finally being realised? And then, of course, in the same action, he picks up that bad injury. I mean, it was being in the stadium, and we were sort of more or less parallel with where it happened. Actually, it was a little strange that the stretcher came on. It looked for all the world like he was going to use the stretcher, but then he kind of insisted on not using the stretcher, and then was helped off with a member of Arne Slot's backroom staff sort of under each arm and helping him off that way. But you do sort of think, if this is a suspected broken leg, and as you say, the look on his face, he knew straight away something bad had happened. Why not get on the stretcher? That you're just risking further damage there. But yeah, I mean, sympathy really for Isak, because he's had such a stop-start time to his Liverpool career. He obviously had no pre-season. He's already had, I think it was a groin injury that sidelined him. So yeah, I mean, if he is out for a while, and it looks like he will be, then it's more pressure on Ekitike, isn't it, to try and lead the line in his absence.
I think that goal showed just why Liverpool was so keen to sign Isak. It was a brilliant finish. It was a world-class striker's finish. And I think we're going to chat about Viktor Gyökeres in a moment, but I just want to kind of look at the 3 big summer signings were Gyökeres, Sesko and Isak. Isak's had a very difficult season, but he is the quality striker in that bracket. Sesko's really struggling at Man United. He looks too slow for the Premier League. I saw Gyökeres at Everton again, not that impressive, but that's the big blow for Liverpool, that just when their big guy scores a classic striker's goal, he gets injured, and we don't know how long he's going to be out for. So you can see why their situation is up in the air. But I do agree with you, James. That Wirtz pass to Isak, that for me is Liverpool post Mo Salah, isn't it? That's what they brought these players in to kind of evolve. And in that moment, Salah was closest to the 80th goal, but 10 seconds later he's back in the door. So we'll have to wait and see what players. I mean, Rob, do you think this brings Salah back, or is it a case of it's too quick to make that assumption?
I mean, to be honest, when I saw that stuff that he said after Leeds, I thought there's no way back for him. I know that I'm always reminded of you being on this pod saying there is always a way back for players. I think you've used the example of Carlos Tevez at City under Mancini, where everyone thought there was no way back for him, and he ended up coming back and helping City win the title. So there is clearly always a way back for players. It seems to have been smoothed over a little bit between Arne Slot and Salah. I think Arne Slot deserves an awful lot of credit for the way that he's handled that, because he's been so calm and so professional in the news conferences that I've seen. The one in Milan was particularly impressive, just the way that he kind of navigated all that. He took every single question. He didn't try and shut it down. I've seen managers get really annoyed when there's been a line of questioning like that, and it doesn't do him any favours. But Arne Slot was so composed all the way through, and I think partly the way that he's handled that has kind of helped smooth it over with Salah. And now there is a situation, if Isak's going to be out for months, 4, 5, 6 months, Salah is going to have to come back and play a significant role for Liverpool in the second half of the season. And he's only going to be as good as his relationship with the manager. And the fact that Arne Slot has looked to diffuse that as quickly as possible, I think it probably helps that Salah has gone to AFCON, calms down a little bit. There's a little bit of distance, regains some form playing for Egypt, where he's the main man with the fans and also with his teammates. Liverpool will hope, I'm assuming, that he'll come back revitalised and ready to play what should be a key role for Liverpool in the second half of the season if they're not going to be with Isak. And you've also got issues around the consistency of Ekitike, of Wirtz. The one guy who has shown that he can be really consistent in the Premier League time and time again is Mo Salah. He's the guy that they need really to build the second half of the season around.
I get all of that, and you are probably right. there's a cynical part of me that just thinks that Liverpool had to play it this way, because there's only one place that Mo Salah's going to go, and that's Saudi Arabia. Obviously, we could debate which club, but he's going to go to the Saudi Pro League eventually. And if the situation had been allowed to just completely deteriorate, then his market value is hugely diminished. But if they can create an environment in which it looks as though there is a route to keeping Salah and reviving his career, then suddenly his price is a little bit higher than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And the Saudis, it will feel even more of a coup to the Saudis that they're getting him. Oh, and there's a bit of doubt about whether he can continue his career, and does he want to stay? Does Arsenal really want to keep him? And all that. If that conversation is going on, then it just looks a little bit more of a coup for the Saudis to then go and get him in January or next summer. I just sort of refuse to believe. I get everything you said there, Rob. I just sort of think they had no choice but to do what they're doing and to sort of suggest that everything's fine. But it's difficult to overlook exactly what Mo Salah's done there. He has looked to undermine his manager at a point at which he was not maybe most vulnerable, but certainly under the pump, and that is hard to forgive. And his teammates will know exactly what has been going on there. And yes, I'm not saying it's an irretrievable situation, but I still think if the Saudis came in with a big offer in January, a big number, and they'll be encouraged to make that number a little bit higher because of the response that Liverpool have had to this, then it suits a lot of people if he goes.
Well, the good news for Liverpool is that their next game is Wolves at home, so all the problems might be mounting, but they've got Wolves at home next, so that's a positive. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about Viktor Gyökeres and his time at Arsenal so far. So I was at Everton against Arsenal at the weekend. Big win for Arsenal, 1-0 after Man City had gone top briefly by beating West Ham at the Etihad. So it was a big moment for Arsenal to prove their mettle, I guess, in the title race. And also a big moment for Viktor Gyökeres, who scored the winning goal from the penalty spot. That was his first goal since the beginning of November. Now, obviously, he was Arsenal's big summer signing, the guy that was signed to score the goals to win the Premier League title. Hasn't quite done that yet. So, James, you wrote about Gyökeres last week, and I think it's fair to say that there's one or two doubts about Gyökeres' his time so far at Arsenal, shall we say?
Yeah, there are, and I think it might be time to just look at him a little bit differently. He was billed as the man who was going to come in to score the goals to win the Premier League. That he was the big nine. He was the man. Mikel Arteta played up to this. I was on their pre-season tour to Singapore and Hong Kong, and they were talking a lot about this guy's got the aura. He's the man. We've not had a proper number 9 for years. Here he is, the big man's in town. It was all about him, and it was all about how they were going to slightly change the way they play. They were going to be more direct. They acknowledged that he is not a player who's going to come link the play like a Havertz or a Mikel Merino, as he's been playing in that sort of makeshift striker's role. This is a guy who plays on the shoulder of the last defender. He needs the ball in behind. He plays in the width of the penalty box, no wider. Don't think about channels, all of that. This is who he is, and we will change to accommodate him. And I think where Arsenal are at the moment is they're caught between the team they were planning to be in pre-season and the team they were last season. And the team they were last season had, particularly in the second half of the season because of the injuries, they had Merino up front. They had that guy who was linking the play and would bring the other attackers into it. And when they've tried to play with Gyökeres as their 9 and be more direct and try and be this sort of new version of Arsenal, it hasn't worked. And there's a number of reasons for that. Gyökeres has not had a great pre-season. He's had he's just not been in form himself. The team has not been playing particularly well. And they've not really had that sort of attacking cohesion and that rhythm in the final third. And so because Gyökeres, of course, has also picked up an injury, they've kind of had to go back to Merino with Havertz being out and Gabriel Jesus taking a long time to come back from his injury. He's obviously back in the squad now. That they've sort of got themselves to the top of the league and had got clear at the top of the league, playing as they had done last season by accident rather than design. And now everybody's fit again. Jesus is back. Havertz is back in the next couple of weeks. Mikel Merino is obviously available along with Gyökeres. this is the point at which they have to make a decision. Are they going to continue to try and see this through and risk being at the top of the table? Or are they going to think, do you know what? We're going to do what's got us here. And that's not to have Gyökeres as the main man who everything goes through.
Can I just play the kind of the case of the defence of Gyökeres a little bit? Now, everyone talks about Alexander Isak's disrupted summer, basically when on strike at Newcastle didn't train. Viktor Gyökeres had a very disrupted time at Sporting Lisbon as well. He flew out, to the Far East with Arsenal on the pre-season tour when he probably wasn't fit or ready to do so. And he's never really had the chance to catch up on his fitness. So, first of all, is he still paying a price for that difficult summer? And secondly, do we not... I mean, I was at Newcastle when they played against... I think he played against Dan Burn, Sven Botman, and Fabian Schär, and then Malik Chow came on. It was like Land of the Giants, and he took a battering that day, but he put such a shift for the team that contribution helped Arsenal win. So, are we kind of misjudging him a little bit because he's not what we expect him to be, and he's still not fully fit from the summer that he had?
Yeah, yes, there's a lot of mitigation. And this is why I say I think we need to look at him slightly differently. I just don't see him being the goal a game 9 to win you the league. I think what he is a very, very good option in rotation with the other 2 or 3 that we've discussed, Havertz, Jesus and Mikel Merino. And it will be a kind of horses for courses element to it. So that's where I think we need to just shift our perceptions of Gyökeres a little bit. And you're right about pre-season. It was a slightly strange situation. I think, the first sort of few days of that tour, well, look, they expected to have him on the tour from the get-go. They didn't, because the conversations with Sporting Lisbon dragged on. I know that even the night before they announced the deal, they were still having issues, 1 or 2 finer points they were negotiating back and forth with Sporting. So it had become quite protracted at the end. The tour was taking place. They played the first game. Or, you were seeing sort of fans doing the mask, and he wasn't even in the country. Everyone was sort of talking about Gyökeres. So they flew him out. He came out for the day they played Newcastle in their second pre-season game. He obviously wasn't in any condition to play. They played that match. The next day they had a recovery session. The following day they then flew 4 hours to Hong Kong. They were there 3 or 4 days, and then they flew back to London. And you can understand, and we actually spoke to him. There was a few of us who spoke to him in Hong Kong. We did a kind of 10-minute sort of round table with him. And you could see, and I don't mean this as a criticism to him, but you could see he was a little bit like, wow, okay, this is, big club, step up. I've been training on my own with, sort of away from everybody else at Sporting. I've come Hong Kong's an incredible city, but it's kind of in your face 24/7. The humidity's high, the buildings are tall, you can't see the sky sometimes. The team hotel was absolutely besieged by fans for the whole time that they were there. It was a really intense thing for him to come into. Bearing in mind, on top of all that, he's being billed as, you're the guy. You are the man who's going to come and deliver the first title in 22 years. And I think he's had a real challenge in dealing with all of that, dealing with the scrutiny that comes with that. And he was the guy they chose over Sesko because he was 5 years older. He had a goal a game for 2 years at Sporting Lisbon, and he was the win now signing. There wasn't any margin for error for him. He had to come in and deliver straight away, and he has struggled to do that. And so, and that's not all his fault by any stretch of the imagination. The question is whether he's good enough to translate anything like that record for Sporting into what's obviously a tougher league in England. The early signs, I would say, are mixed on that, but it might not matter. We're talking as if Arsenal are, 5 points off the lead and are sort of hanging on to the coattails of teams above them. They're not. They're top of the table, and they haven't played particularly well for a while. And I've said on this pod a few times, if the attack clicks, it's game over. They'll win the league. But the question is how they make that attack click. Do they persevere with Gyökeres every week, or do they put him in rotation with the others and play a more horses for courses style, which is what I think they should do.
Rob, just a bit of a sliding doors question for you. So James just referenced that it was Gyökeres over Sesko. Do you think, obviously, because Gyökeres had a relationship with Amorim at Sporting Lisbon, had it gone the other way, had Gyökeres gone to Man United and Sesko to Arsenal, would that have been the better solution for both clubs and both strikers?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I can understand why you might say that. I think there would probably be more time for Sesko to have adapted at Arsenal than there has been for him to adapt at Man United. And Sesko might have got, more going through him at Man United than he does at Arsenal. I think there are two things here. I think, James just referenced it there. I think the Premier League is the hardest league in the world to score goals in. And there's an example of Sesko at Villa Park on Sunday where the ball kind of breaks from him in the first half. He gets his one clear chance of the game, and it's saved by Martinez. It's a good save. Sesko hits the target. In the Bundesliga, he probably gets 3 or 4 of those in the bulk of the games that he plays in. The same with Gyökeres when he plays in Portugal. In the Premier League, you just don't get that. And so your kind of margin for error is greatly reduced. And a lot of strikers have found out in that respect. It's why Erling Haaland's numbers in the Premier League are so unbelievable, because he's carried on that kind of almost goal a game record that he's had anywhere else he's gone. The second thing is is the kind of the fixation with stats. Now, I completely accept that a striker's role in a football team is to score goals, but it's not all about that. I mean, I watched that Arsenal game on Saturday night, and Gyökeres does an awful lot away from the goal that he probably doesn't get the credit for. And there was times in that game where the ball was getting pumped up from Saliba, and he's battling with Tarkowski and Keane. He's trying to hold the ball up. Sometimes it's not coming off, but often it is coming off, and he gets Arsenal higher up the pitch. Arsenal fans probably looking at that, probably not really noticing, but you are helping your team even if you're not finding the net. And I just think that sometimes, I remember doing an interview with Jack Grealish a few years ago where he was moaning about this and basically saying that at City, he could have the best game in the world, in the middle of everything, but not get an assist, not get a goal. And he would look in the paper the next day and he would get 6 out of 10. There are other games that he said he's had, whether he's had the worst game in the world, but he's turned up at the back post twice. He's had 2 tap-ins, scored twice, and he's getting the man of the match announced in the stadium. He just says that doesn't make any kind of sense. So I do feel sorry for Gyökeres a little bit. For Sesko is another one, that there is this mad focus on stats, and it must be tough for someone like Gyökeres, who at Sporting Lisbon, you just said there, was averaging a goal every game, and he's now coming into a league where he's just not getting the volume of chances, and also he's held to this high standard where he's expected to score 20 league goals. Scoring 20 league goals in the Premier League is a massive achievement, and that's why not many people do it.
You're absolutely right, Rob. I mean, there isn't a stat for holding the ball up or giving a platform for your team. I've seen it with Sesko. Sesko has brought that to United. He's brought a centre-forward's craft. And I think Gyökeres, the Newcastle game that I referenced, he really did play like an old-fashioned centre-forward for his team. But there's no stat for that. It's like, it gets on my nerves when people get an assist
But the problem is, though, guys, is that if you just take Arsenal in isolation here, they drew, I think it was 13 or 14 league games last year. They don't need someone to hold the ball up. They need someone to put it in the back of the net. And that was kind of, he was supposed to be the guy who would make that difference, and he hasn't been able to do it yet. So that's why in an Arsenal context, he's being judged perhaps a little harsher than otherwise. But again, to me, he does. You're right. He does a lot of work off the ball. He occupies defenders in a way that, Marino, Havertz, they don't move in the same way. Even Gabriel Jesus, their movement is different. So in certain games, he can offer you, a really potent threat and somebody who really can spearhead an attack. But there are other games where he just doesn't look suited, and that's okay. That's fine. But this is why I'm saying I think the perception of him needs to change a little bit. He's not, or at least not yet, the striker who can home and away, he starts, he's your 9, when he's fit, he plays, and he will probably get you a goal. That's not who he is at the moment. And I'm not sure it's who he ever will be, but it's too early to say that. But I think in the context of this season, because of the opportunity that Arsenal have, because the fact that their strikers are now coming back fit, and because of how well they play when he's not in the team, and by that I mean the others kind of come alive a little bit more around him, I don't think that Gyökeres should be the number 9 who starts every game between now and May. I think he's a very good, very viable, credible option in some matches, but not others.
You've just trampled all over my question there a little bit, James, but I'm going to ask you it anyway. That the best strikers in the Premier League are that kind of one chance, one goal, you win 1-0. The Premier League is about those fine kind of margins. If Gyökeres isn't that player right now, and you're kind of suggesting that maybe he hasn't got the quality to ever be that player, does he have a place in that Arsenal squad long term, or is there a danger because of the money that he came in for that in a year's time we may be labelling Gyökeres as a flop and the club are trying to offload him and bring in the next one goal striker?
Well, for that to be the case, they'd need to identify somebody who's a better bet than him. And I think that was maybe what we'll come to think about of this window in years to come. You know, the summer window, which is sort of billed as the summer of strikers, that actually, you know, I mean, look, Sesko and Gyökeres, I'm not going to sit here and write the pair off, because particularly Gyökeres obviously had a very, very good record in Sporting. But I don't think clubs were looking at those two and thinking they're absolutely nailed on, guarantee sort of Erling Haaland style successes. You get them, they're going to improve your team. We all probably thought that about Isak because of what he'd done at Newcastle, and that hasn't worked out at Liverpool either. And so there's questions for both of them to answer. Look, if Arsenal win the league, then Gyökeres is a successful signing, right? If he scores 10 goals and they win the title, great. You know, they've won. That's the bigger prize. There's no concern there. And his work rate is great. He's diligent. He's a professional who cares about his craft. He will improve. I'm sure he will get better from where he is now. And, you know, you don't know, in his second year, maybe he will get better. I think they've invested, obviously, quite a lot of money. It was 73 million euros, I think, including the add-ons, significant wages. I don't think they're about to give up on him after a year or anything like that. But I just don't think he's going to be the absolute pivotal, you know, sort of title winner signing that he was billed as in the summer. Because I don't think he's clinical enough, and I'm yet to see enough evidence that Arsenal are a better, more dynamic attacking unit when he's in the team.
Right, so we're going to all stop being Scrooge about Viktor Gyökeres now. We're going to talk about Christmas, and for the 8th time since 1951, Arsenal are top of the league at Christmas. But on the 7 previous occasions, they haven't won the league. Is that going to change this time? I'll ask Rob first, and James, you can finish off with your gloomy prediction.
I need to be cautious because I realise that I've been changing my title winner from week to week. The one worry that I've got for Arsenal is that they haven't got over the line in the last 20 odd years. And there's a stat that I read over the weekend that in the 6 title winning years at City under Pep Guardiola, between February the 1st and the end of the season, they played 95 league games. Of those 95 league games, they've lost 8. And half of those when the title were already secured. You know, that is the kind of relentless form that Guardiola gets out of his City teams when he can smell the title. Now, this is a different City team. They're in a little bit of transition. They've lost a lot of experience. But that is a kind of history Arsenal are battling against. Now, I'm not suggesting that they can't do it, but they haven't done it yet. And until they do, you know, no one's going to know whether they're capable or not. I just think that maybe the relentless nature of what this City team can achieve will be the undoing of Arsenal again, and what has been a great first half of the season for them may not prove to be enough because City just have that, whatever it is, that intangible quality to go 10, 11, 12 games and win them all on the bounce when it really matters most. You know, Arsenal will have to go a long way to prove that they can actually do that, and that's what defines title-winning teams.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree. It should be Arsenal's year. It should be. They've got the best squad. As you say, they're top at Christmas. They've had the lead. They've really tried, I think, mentally to sort of kick on from last season. Obviously, finishing second 3 years in a row can create this perception that maybe there's a glass ceiling that they're never going to break. I think they've shown signs of being able to move on from that, but we're not going to know until the sort of March, April, you know, time kicks in. The one thing that I think would give me confidence if I was an Arsenal fan would be to say, well, once you get your back four back fit, playing regularly, Gabriel and Saliba obviously at the heart of that defence, you suddenly look at a team that if it can defend the way that it did in the first part of the season, where it's essentially giving up absolutely nothing, then you don't need your attack to click too much because 1-0 will be enough. But this is what I've said on this pod all along, is that Arsenal all season really have been playing with these fine margins where the defence has been so good that they've been able to rely on their set-piece prowess. We all know how good they are from dead ball situations, or a moment of quality from one of the many attacking players they've got. And that's been enough because they're not giving up much at the back. Now, because they've had those injuries of late and maybe the level of their defending has just dropped a little bit, Arteta alluded to that after the Wolves game. We talked about some horrible defensive sort of principles that they showed in the final few minutes of that game when they conceded an equaliser and then obviously went on to win it really late on. If that creeps into their game, then you do worry about their mentality and whether the attack-wise they've got enough to sort of outscore every opponent they're going to need to face. But I think if they get everyone fit, then I think they win the league. I think if they continue to struggle with injuries as they do, and City are just sat perched on their shoulder, then those doubts about the last sort of 3 years and are we good enough and do we always find a reason not to win it will come into play. If it gets tight, I do fancy City, but am I hedging my bets here? I think I am, aren't I? Yeah, I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to say it should be Arsenal, but I fear it might be City.
Yeah, Arsenal, like one of those toys you had at Christmas where they're about to start running out on Boxing Day. I think that's where they're looking right now. I think that, especially with Man City, got the really strong batteries in them. I think Man City are going to win the league, and Arsenal, they've got to hold off Liverpool for second spot. So, sorry, Arsenal fans. Anyway, that's enough on Arsenal for now. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back afterwards with Don Hutchison and football's difficult relationship with alcohol. So recently you may have read Wayne Rooney talking about his battle with alcohol during his playing career, saying that he had a massive problem. And it was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people, considering that, Rooney had a fantastic career, played at Man United for over 10 years, won everything he could win. But even he admitted that, alcohol was an issue in the game. So I did a piece on it recently about the impact of alcohol and whether it's still a problem in the game. And I was kind of surprised that the PFA told me that they had a survey out last year amongst their members, Premier League players, EFL players and WSL players. And 13% of their responders admitted to having an issue with alcohol. So we read a piece about it, and within that piece spoke to Don Hutchison, obviously ex-Liverpool, Everton, West Ham, Scotland player, because Don was part of the scene in the, is it fair to say, the mad 90s, Don, when alcohol was part of the game, and it was an issue that kind of, remained until, I guess, the foreign influence came in a few years later.
I think that's very fair. I think it was the culture of the teams coming off the back of the 80s and then the Britpop scene, I think, of the early 90s. And, Manchester had Hacienda, Liverpool had Creamware, was at the time, and it was an easy option. We got sort of, like any young lads, we got sort of influenced by the older players who had all the success. And part of their success was obviously being brilliant players, but socially sticking together and socially having a beer, and they could play through it, and they were so talented, and the league was probably a little bit slower. Then the league started to get a bit faster and a bit more sort of disciplined. But I think the younger players got dragged into it a little bit. It's not, I'm not pushing it onto the older players at all, because we made the final decisions, but it's fair to say that we were easily led.
I mean, you mentioned in the piece, Don, that basically, was it Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon, you get a taxi into the training ground because you knew that after training, it would be basically an afternoon and an evening in the bar, and then I don't know how many beers or other alcoholic drinks you'd take, but it was quite a heavy session by the sounds of it.
Yeah, well, Tuesday was a day where there was a sports bar around the corner from Melwood. As I said, the older boys used to go there quite regular. Dartboard, pool table, snooker table, a bit of cards, like whatever. And Tuesdays was a sort of unwritten rule where, as I said, we got influenced by the older boys, so we tagged along, and there was a little bit of peer pressure to go along because you didn't want to be the sort of black sheep where you didn't go and you might get talked about because you wanted to be part of the dressing room. You wanted to be seen as a sort of good lad at the time. And then Tuesdays was an unwritten rule where you'd drive your car into Melwood. So you'd actually drive your car into Melwood, do your training. Then after training on Tuesday, you'd nip across to the sports bar for a sort of few drinks and an all day out. And then the older boys might go out with their families, but the younger boys are sort of in it. So we'd then be, out all night. And then Wednesday, you've got Wednesday off. So you're sort of recovering on a Wednesday. And then Thursday morning, that's when you stick your taxi back into training because your car's already there. So it was a mad scenario that I'm surprised that the managers and the coaching staff didn't pull us up on, or they did and they let it slide. I'm not sure. So that was the sort of scenario. London was another thing whenever we were playing, whether it was at Liverpool or somewhere else. When I was at West Ham just after, if we were at Liverpool and we were playing a London game, again, we'd stay down. I don't know how the managers never knew, because when they got back on the bus, half the team weren't coming back, half the team were missing because we're in a hotel and enjoying the nightlife, like Legends and Emporium, and the nightlife of the 90s was flying. So it was all social for me. And I never really got affected. I was lucky enough to, as you know, to be pretty fit and a cross-country runner, and I never carried any weight. So it was all socials for me. But you look back and you just think, my regret is when I look back now thinking like, I could have had so much more. And I was at Liverpool, I think, for 3.5, 4 years. And I'd like to think I'd like to think I should have been there for a lot longer. My regret is probably I could have been there for 10 years, but we'll never know.
I mean, I never reached Don's level, obviously, in football, but having bounced around sort of lower league clubs when in my early 20s, the thing that struck me about those times was how much free time players had. You know, what we would do, you'd come in the morning, have your breakfast at the training ground, do your gym session, cup of tea, out to training, you know, have your lunch at the training ground. You'd be done by 12:30, 1 o'clock, and there was literally nothing else to do. You know, yes. Wives, girlfriends would be at work, kids would be at school. Basically, the afternoon was for whatever you wanted to do, and lads would go out to the pub because they were bored. You know, more than anything, they would go to casinos because there was nothing else to do, and it kind of snowballs a little bit from there. And particularly at that time, you know, the training grounds that I was at, there was nothing there. There was a cold shower to have a shower after training. There was a little canteen to have a piece of toast and maybe some lunch, some chips, before you went home. There was nothing else there. There was literally nothing else to do. And now it's interesting now that, you know, you go around Man United's training ground now, the 50 million quid that they spent in the summer, part of that was designed to make the training ground a place where players want it to be. You know, they don't necessarily want players leaving the training ground at 12:30, 1 o'clock and just being left to their own devices, because they know what kind of temptations are out there. So they're trying to put things at the training ground to keep players there till sort of, you know, 4, 5 o'clock in the evening, whether it's, you know, better gym facilities, whether it's like pool tables, ping pong tables, gaming systems, all that kind of things to keep them there, because they know they can keep a closer eye on players at the training ground. It is interesting the way that, you know, times have changed. And I'm sure that, you know, Don, you can kind of attest to that
yeah,
when you were playing it in the late 90s, sort of early 2000s, the amount of free time you must have had at that time, you know, there was nothing else to do to fill it.
No, it was actually frowned upon back in the day to play golf. And you look back now and you go, surely that was better. I mean, I played under Howard Kendall, and Howard, I mean, bless him, he did like a bit of a party scene, and, you know, Howard's way was Howard's way. And you know, I remember training one day, I think I was at Everton, and I trained on a Thursday. And he pulled me after training. He went, "Did you play golf yesterday?" And I went, "No." And he went, "Ask you one more time. Did you play golf yesterday?" And I couldn't lie to Howard. And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "I could tell today." He said, "Because your legs were leggy." He went, "You looked a yard short." He went, get rid of the golf. But it's no good for you." And then you look back at it and you think, well, should I have a few beers in the afternoon? Which one's better for you?
So, I mean, one thing, I mean, going back to my younger days when I was starting out in the job, and I mean, it's probably a similar time to you were starting out at Liverpool, Don, and I remember those days that the press room at Anfield was basically opposite the players' bar. So you'd hang around the players' bar. You basically, what you're doing in the 90s, you'd basically either wait outside the dressing room for the players, or you'd wait outside the players' bar. And you're looking back thinking, you know, players going in the players' bar after a game, professional play, you know, Premier League players. So you basically stand at the press room and wait for the players either to go in or come out. And there's one story I'll tell. When I was really young, when I was starting out this job, I was at a Man United game. I think we were playing Sheffield Wednesday. Back in those days, you'd wait outside the players' bar. And I spoke to a player, I won't name him just because he was one of my idols growing up. And it was about an hour after the game, and he was slurring his words after maybe had a couple of beers in the bar, maybe a bit more, I don't know. But that was what happened at the time, that you would basically wait and players would relax in the bar and chill out, and they get back on the coach and maybe even carry on when they got back. And to now, I mean, Don, back in those days, I think it all changed when Arsene Wenger became the Arsenal manager. And one of the first things he did, he closed the players' bar, and it caused a massive controversy at Arsenal, because that was a team of Tony Adams, Paul Merson, who have since come out and admitted they were big drinkers and had big problems with alcohol. It was a big drinking team. He banned alcohol on the players' coach on the way home, not because he frowned upon the risk of alcohol. It was more a case of these guys are getting in the car when they get home to drive home. So it was a safety issue. So, but back in this is probably like 96, 97. In the game at the time, Don, were you thinking this won't last? There's no way that this is going to stick. Or was it like, that's interesting, you know, the players' bar being...
No, I think it was a natural occurrence. I mean, Graham Souness was the manager at Liverpool when he took over from Kenny, and he changed the sort of diet. I remember him having sort of pizzas coming after the game or pasta coming after the game to try and refuel. It was only a matter of time. I mean, I tell you, looking back, he just sort of jogged my memory. When I first signed for Liverpool, just going back a couple of years, I signed in 1990, and we were coming through. There was loads of young boys like Jamie Redknapp and Steve McManaman, myself, Mike Marsh, David James, Rob Jones, Robbie Fowler. And me and Steve McManaman were like proper skinny, like really, really skinny. Like I'm, you know, from Gateshead and spent my little time at Hartlepool before I moved on to Liverpool. But me and Macca, Steve McManaman, were exactly the same, proper skinny. And one of the coaching staff at the time decided it might be a good idea when everyone has their meal. The meal was actually in the players' lounge where you've probably been a million times in the 90s. And Ronnie Moran actually said to the girl behind the bar, why don't you give Don and Steve McManaman, them two only, every single day, a half pint of Guinness for iron. And you can imagine like Stevie Nicol and John Barnes and Rushy and Steve McMahon and all the older boys going, what's going on here? But it was literally meant like to give them a bit of iron to sort of thicken them up a little bit because we're really skinny. But then off the back of Arsene, I mean, it was the right thing to do. The culture was shifting. Cream was brilliant for me in Liverpool because I never drank when I went there. So the Conti was next door, the nightclub called the Continental.
Just to add for the listeners, Don, Cream for the younger listeners.
Cream
was a nightclub back in the day. It was a legendary
house
nightclub.
place. You boys will know.
And Don used to get in with a VIP pass, but then we carry on.
Yeah, no, it was a place where you just enjoyed the music. So it was a little bit of a saviour for me because I didn't drink, but I was never affected by drink. I could never be an alcoholic. I didn't really like the taste of it. I hated the morning afterwards. I hated that feeling in the morning where it just felt terrible. So the drinking that I done and we done as Liverpool lads, youngsters, was all social. It was all meant to just like de-stress and have a good time with your mates and a bit of bonding. But and don't forget, like we're 18, 19. That's the thing that you've got to remember. Like this is where it kills me because you wish at 18, 19 you could have had your head on when you were 30 and not even touch it and not even go to these places. But when you're 18, 19 and you're living on your own, as Rob said, there's no kids. You're just young lads, you're teenagers. And when you're in, from me, Liverpool instead of away from Gateshead or Newcastle, you just socialise. You don't really see it as a big thing. And then once it's all moved on, that's when you look back and you think, yeah, it needed to be eradicated as quick as possible.
But Don, to that point, I mean, you're a young lad now. He's 18, 19. He's making his own way in the game. He's playing in Ireland. And do you see a difference in the way that they prepare for games and the way, the way that they kind of recover as well?
You don't drink. You don't drink. I mean, they had a players, funny enough, it was in Liverpool about 2 weeks ago because he's back for their end of season. They play like a summer season. Mm. And they had their night out in Liverpool about 2 weeks ago. And he just drank Coke. He had a little bit of alcohol. Nothing mad. And he said he only had about 3 or 4. And then he went to bed, come home. The next morning, I think, was all about the social. It was all about the young kids sort of chatting, having a laugh together. That probably would have been for some of them a great day, all nighter. But he's just never really been built that way. Not because I've told him. I think it's just the younger generation. They're sort of staying away from it. They know it's not great for you. And I think they feel the effects more so the morning after. So they're like, nah, not even going to go there.
I think part of that is just a general change of attitude to diet, isn't it? And lifestyle. I mean, again, like when I first started out, I can remember, if you lost the small-sided games on a Friday, if you lost, you had to come in the next day with biscuits for all the other lads. You're talking about massive tubs of biscuits, and the lads would sit there at lunchtime with the chips at lunch, eating a full pack of chocolate hobnobs the day before a game. And I can only imagine what dietitians now, Premier League dietitians.
Hey, it weren't all bad though, It weren't all bad. We had a great time doing it. The lads were lucky enough, like myself, to stay away from being or getting in serious trouble with alcoholism or drugs or whatever, which I never thought was ever part of the scene. But we did have a good time. I mean, Rob mentions the training ground. I mean, we had an old lady at Everton when I was there, and an old lady called Shirley at West Ham when I was there, and the maximum you got was beans on toast. And you asked for any sort of cheese or any brown sauce on the top, they'd tell you to do one. You're getting beans on toast, and that's it.
I hope it was brown sauce.
Can I ask, Don? I mean, there is because lots of instances of players kind of overindulging in this kind of thing. But part of me sometimes thinks if you get to that level as an athlete, you almost have to have that kind of addictive personality anyway. You have to be addicted to training, addicted to getting better to even reach that level. Mm. And I'm not suggesting it happens with everyone, but with some professional athletes, that can kind of stretch over into other things. And maybe professional athletes, footballers are a little bit more susceptible to going down the wrong path with alcohol or gambling or all those kind of things, because it's kind of built into their personality anyway as professional athletes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I never really saw it that way. I always saw it like we were addicted to football. Yeah. We were like, we played really hard and we enjoyed ourselves off the pitch. But when it was kit on time at Liverpool or wherever I was, Everton, West Ham, Sunderland, wherever we were, when you put that kit on, that training kit on, it was like, we always loved football. It was just the side part of just getting away for it for a few hours. That was my journey, just getting away from it, enjoying being in lads' company.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing better than being in a lad's company. There's like 10, 12, 15 of us. It doesn't have to be alcohol. You know, some lads didn't drink. When I was at Sunderland, Emerson Tom didn't drink. Julio Arca didn't drink. There was a few boys that didn't drink, but they'd come along. We made it mandatory when we were at Sunderland. Mickey Gray was the captain. Anyone's birthday, anyone had a kid or anything like that, anything to celebrate, we'd go into Newcastle and we'd have a few drinks in the afternoon as long as it was the right time. But we made it mandatory that other boys that didn't drink had to come, and you just show your face for an hour and then show your face, have a Coke or have a water, whatever you want, and then go home. So when you say addicted, I get what you mean, because that's the footballer's sort of character, where you're addicted to playing football. You can lean into gambling or lean into drink, which I feel sorry for the boys that ever get sort of addicted into getting sucked into that. So I count myself very lucky, but I could see it.
One thing that came up when I was speaking to the PFA, the wellbeing team, led by Jeff Whitley, you may remember him, Danny. He was at City and Northern Ireland during the 90s. But they're saying that, you know, players still have addictive personalities, and if they're not having issues with alcohol, there are things that they're worried about right now, including gambling. There's overtraining is an issue, and snus. Now, a lot of kind of listeners might not know what snus is. It's basically a nicotine patch which you stick between your gums, and that's a big problem. The PFA is saying that every club, even the top clubs, are having to deal with snus. Now, I think you've got a bit of a story about snus as well, how you kind of started coming onto the scene.
Well, it's a funny one. I say it in jest for anyone that's struggling out there, but I first seen it when I was at Everton, and Thomas Myhre, our Norwegian goalkeeper, used to put it up his lip on his gum, and apparently used to relax him on the coach on the way to games. And we played a game against Arsenal, I think it was at Goodison. And I used to sort of, when I played up front, I used to stand sort of on the left side, really wide left. And I said to Thomas, right, just drill it straight through the middle, because I'll make my run. And I was never particularly good at a stand and jump, but I could run and I could jump quite high, and I used to win the flick-ons. We'd go from there. And Thomas was like, he was all over the place. Like, he just couldn't find me. It was really frustrating, because that was the sort of starting point of our sort of attacks, if you like. He's winning the flick-ons, playing their half. And I've gone in at half time. I've gone, Thomas, is there any chance you can hit me on the diag so I can win the first header? And he's gone, shh. He went, I'm colourblind. I can't see that far. And I was like, well, no wonder we're in the bottom three. I went, you've got that rubbish up your lip and you're colourblind. And it's like, what chance you got? And it's like, dearie me. But it was like, I never really seen it after Thomas. I seen it. I think Slaven Bilic used to have a little bit of it at West Ham, but I never really seen loads of it. And I always sort of like fascinate me, thinking like, what is it? What's that for? The
thinking is that, so in the survey that the PFA did, that the players come back and say it helps them relax, it helps them sleep. But the reality is it doesn't, because it's a stimulant. It's got tobacco in it. So the science says that it can't do what you're saying it's doing. So that's the issue, that clubs are struggling with it. But I guess it's just, their thought is that if you've got an addictive personality, you'll find something, and it's dealing with that. They have obviously help. They have the Sporting Chanter Clinic. They have therapy as well. So I guess that the PFA and the game itself is different now to what it was back in your day in the 90s, Don, where you can actually go for help if you want it, and that it's not a hidden thing anymore. And I think just to finish on that, really, I think you said at the time that it was more difficult back in those days if you felt you had an issue to deal with it, but now there's help there.
And that's a great thing, because we started with the peer pressure and, what it was like. You imagine like trying to knock on Graham Souness's door or Kenny Dalglish's door if you're at Liverpool, or Man United with Sir Alex, and try and open up a little bit and tell them you've got a problem, because back then it was seen, right, you've got a problem where you're not going to play for the first team. I'm sort of paraphrasing. That's probably not what they thought, but that was the impression that you got being a young boy going to a manager's office. You didn't want to be seen as, even if you've got a slight problem, you didn't want that slight problem to knock you out of the first team squad. So you kept it in-house. You probably would have discussed it with a few of your young teammates. It wouldn't have got any further than that. So for the young boys now, there's personnel at the football clubs that they can lean on. There's coaches that they can lean on. I would imagine all the doors are open. But the PFA, I think it's a great tool. It always has been. But the players have got to be that little bit braver to make that first step. And maybe it's on the PFA to send their representatives into the football club a lot more, instead of just once a season in the summer, make it once a month.
Well, that's it for this week. Just want to thank Don for giving us the recollections of his experiences back in the 90s, back in the glory days of the Premier League. I guess that's what people are saying these days. The 90s are the peak years, aren't they? Everyone's kind of reflected on those days. No stats, no XG, no possession. There you go. The dream era. But anyway, we're back after Christmas with the Football Reporters in the new year. So enjoy your time, and we'll see you soon.